My name is Daniel. I'm 29 years old, and for the past year I've been living alone in a small townhouse I bought after saving for years. It's not fancy, but it's mine, and I've worked hard to carve out a life that feels stable after years of family chaos. The funny thing is, I thought buying a place of my own would finally give me peace. What I didn't count on was my sister, Emily, deciding that my independence meant I was now her built-in safety net. Or, as she likes to call it, the fun uncle who doesn't mind helping out. Except, it hasn't felt like helping. It's felt like being taken advantage of. Emily is 2 years older than me, 31, and has two kids, 6-year-old twins who are, to put it mildly, a handful. They're good kids at heart, but they have boundless energy, zero bedtime discipline, and a habit of breaking anything they get their hands on. I love them, but I also know my limits. The problem is, Emily doesn't. Ever since her breakup with her long-term boyfriend, she's been pawning the kids off on me at every opportunity. At first, I thought I was just stepping in to help during a rough patch. She was adjusting to being a single mom, and I figured, what kind of brother would I be if I didn't offer a hand? But what started as the occasional weekend soon turned into every weekend. And then every Friday through Sunday. And then, unbelievably, sometimes even weekdays when she had plans. It came to a head on a chilly Saturday morning about a month ago. I had just settled into my couch, coffee in hand, looking forward to a day of quiet, when my doorbell rang. I already had a sinking feeling as I walked to the door. Sure enough, there stood Emily, hair done up like she was ready for a night out, her kids fidgeting beside her. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Hey, thanks again, Danny," she chirped, already turning to leave. I blinked at her, still groggy. "Wait, what? I didn't agree to this." She waved her hand like I was being silly. "Come on, you love spending time with them. I'll pick them up tomorrow evening." And then she was gone, heels clacking down my walkway before I could even get another word out. That was the fourth weekend in a row. The twins ran inside, dumping their backpacks in the hallway, and I just stood there, stunned. I felt this heavy knot in my chest, resentment mixing with guilt. I love those kids, but I hated being cornered. I hated how Emily made me feel like I didn't have a choice, like my time wasn't my own. I told myself I'd talk to her about it when she came back to pick them up, but by the time Sunday rolled around, she was too busy to chat. She scooped up the twins, blew me a kiss, and sped off. The fifth weekend was worse. It wasn't just that she dropped them off again, it was the way she did it. No knock, no explanation. I heard the commotion at my door and opened it just in time to see her car pulling out of my driveway, her kids standing on my porch like two little abandoned packages. I stood there, speechless, watching her taillights disappear. That's when I snapped. Not in front of the kids, of course, but inside, something broke. I realized Emily didn't see me as her brother. She saw me as free childcare. And when I finally called her later that night to tell her enough was enough, that I wasn't their built-in babysitter, she didn't even try to hide her fury. "Are you kidding me, Daniel?" she screamed through the phone. "You have no idea how hard it is being a single mom. You sit there in your nice little house, with no responsibilities, no kids, no partner. Your life is easy. The least you could do is help your own family." I tried to stay calm, but my voice shook when I told her I wouldn't keep doing this. "I'm not saying I'll never help," I said, "but I can't keep giving up every single weekend. I need my own life, too." The line went silent for a beat, and I thought maybe she was calming down. Then she hissed, "Fine. If you won't step up, maybe mom and dad should know what kind of selfish son they raised." An hour later, my parents were calling me, demanding to know why I was abandoning my sister in her time of need. I tried to explain, but my mom cut me off with, "You're single, Daniel. You don't have real responsibilities. Of course you should help." The anger in my chest burned hotter. My whole life, Emily had been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I was always the one expected to bend, to adjust, to give up my time and energy because you don't have kids, so you wouldn't understand. I thought I could shrug it off, but then came the part that made my blood run cold. Just when I thought the storm had passed, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, two uniformed police officers were standing on my porch. "Are you Daniel Carter?" one of them asked. My heart plummeted. "Yes," I managed to say, my voice tight. The taller officer nodded gravely. "We've received a call about a potential abandonment situation. Do you mind if we step inside?" And that's when I realized my sister had crossed a line I didn't think even she was capable of. The moment those words left the officer's mouth, my stomach turned into stone. Abandonment situation? I repeated, my voice cracking slightly. Behind me, the twins were in the living room, loudly arguing over who got to use the tablet first. Their laughter and shrieks echoed through the house, completely at odds with the seriousness of what was happening at my front door. The officers stepped inside, and I instinctively moved back, still in shock. The taller one introduced himself as Officer Miller, while the other, a younger officer named Reed, glanced around the room, taking in the toys scattered across the floor. Miller's expression softened when he saw the kids, clearly healthy and safe, but his tone was professional. We got a call from a relative expressing concern that the children may have been left unattended or neglected. I felt heat rising in my face. What? That's insane. They're my niece and nephew. My sister dropped them off this morning without even asking me, like she always does. They've been with me all day. I've been taking care of them. I gestured toward the living room where the twins were now racing toy cars across the coffee table. Reed raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Miller gave a polite nod, jotting something down in his notepad. Do you mind if we ask the kids a couple of questions? Miller asked. My instinct was to protest. I didn't want them dragged into this mess, but I also didn't want to look defensive. So I sighed and said, sure, go ahead. The officers crouched down to the kids' level and asked simple things. What their names were, how long they'd been at Uncle Daniel's, if they had eaten, if they felt safe. The twins answered cheerfully, completely oblivious to the tension. Uncle Danny gave us pancakes and we watched cartoons, one of them said proudly. Miller nodded, satisfied. He stood and faced me again. Looks like they're well taken care of. I think this was a misunderstanding. But I knew it wasn't a misunderstanding. Emily had weaponized the police against me. After the officers left, assuring me that no further action would be taken, I sat at the kitchen table, my hands trembling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. Instead, I called Emily. She picked up on the second ring, her voice dripping with fake innocence. Oh, the cops came? Well, good. Maybe now you'll take your role more seriously. My role? I snapped. Emily, I'm your brother, not your babysitter. You can't just dump your kids on me whenever you feel like it, and then call the police on me when I draw a boundary. She laughed, a cold, sharp sound. Boundaries? You don't get to have boundaries, Daniel. You don't have a family of your own, so you don't know what sacrifice is. You owe me this. You owe Mom and Dad for everything they did for us. That word, oh, stuck in my brain like a splinter. The next weekend, I thought maybe she'd give me space. Maybe after the police fiasco, she'd back off. But no. Friday evening, she pulled into my driveway with the twins, didn't even bother to knock, just honked until I came outside. When I didn't immediately open the door, she marched up and started banging on it like she owned the place. I opened the door a crack and told her flat out, I'm not doing this anymore. Her eyes narrowed. You don't get to say no. She shoved the twins' backpacks at me. You're taking them. I have plans. I didn't move to take the bags. The twins, sensing the tension, shuffled awkwardly behind her. Emily, listen to me carefully, I said, my voice low but firm. I am not responsible for your choices. If you have plans, you need to make arrangements. Not me. She exploded. Do you know how selfish you sound? You've always been like this, lazy, unhelpful, hiding in your little world while I carry the real weight. Mom and Dad agree with me. They told me you're being ridiculous. And she wasn't lying. That same night, Mom called, her voice sharp with disappointment. Daniel, why are you making things so difficult? Your sister needs you. Those children need you. Why can't you just step up? I tried explaining, again, how often Emily was using me, how it wasn't just once in a while, it was constant. But Mom cut me off. You don't understand because you've never had to sacrifice for anyone. You've always been the one we had to push. Your sister has always been stronger, more responsible. This is your chance to finally prove you're part of this family. Her words landed like punches. Stronger, more responsible. That was always Emily, according to them. I was the one who needed to prove myself, no matter how much I achieved. Never mind that I was the first to graduate college, the one who bought my own home without a cent from them. None of it mattered. The favoritism wasn't new, but this time, it burned deeper. It wasn't just about words. They were actively undermining me, siding with Emily as she trampled over my life. The following week, I started getting texts from my dad too, echoing the same message. It's family, Daniel. You don't turn your back on family. When I didn't respond, he sent another. Don't make us regret raising you. It felt like I was drowning. Every time I stood up for myself, the weight of their disapproval pulled me under. And Emily knew it. She started using that favoritism as a weapon. When I refused to watch the twins one night, she showed up at my house anyway, parked the car in my driveway, and shouted loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Guess Uncle Daniel doesn't care if his niece and nephew starve. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to shut the world out. But more than anything, I felt the first flicker of something else, something sharp, cold, and focused. I was done being their doormat. And that was the moment when the idea of turning the tables on all of them first began to form in my mind. The breaking point came 2 weeks later, on what was supposed to be an ordinary Thursday. I had just come home from work, exhausted, looking forward to reheating leftovers and zoning out on the couch. The house was quiet, just how I liked it. But as I walked up to my front door, I froze. There, sitting on my porch, were the twins. Alone. Their little backpacks were propped against the wall, and a grocery bag sat beside them with what looked like pajamas stuffed inside. My stomach dropped. They waved at me cheerfully, like this was completely normal. "Hi, Uncle Danny," one of them chirped. "Mom said we're having a sleepover." I was stunned. "Where's your mom?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. They shrugged, pointing vaguely down the street. "She said she had to run errands. She told us to wait here because you'd be home soon." My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door and ushered them inside. The idea that Emily had left her 6-year-olds sitting unattended on my porch, for who knows how long, made me feel sick. Anything could have happened. I called her immediately, my voice trembling with fury. She picked up after several rings, sounding breathless, like she'd just parked her car somewhere crowded. "Relax, they're fine," she said dismissively. "You're overreacting. They were safe on your porch. It's not like you live in a bad neighborhood. Are you out of your mind?" I yelled. "They're 6 years old, Emily. You left them alone on a doorstep. Do you have any idea what could have happened?" She scoffed. "Oh, please. You act like I abandoned them in a field. You're being dramatic. They knew you'd be home soon. Stop acting like the hero. You're just their uncle, not their parent. You don't understand the kind of sacrifices I make every day." That word again. Sacrifices. Like leaving her kids unattended was something noble. I wanted to slam the phone down, but before I could, she delivered the real betrayal. Her voice dropped into that syrupy, manipulative tone I knew too well. "Honestly, Daniel, if you can't handle watching them, maybe I'll just call CPS myself. Tell them you don't want to care for your own family. See how that looks." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Was she threatening to weaponize the system against me again? After everything? I had barely processed the first time she dragged the police into this mess. The thought of her actually filing something with child services sent a chill down my spine. "Are you serious?" I whispered. "You're the one making this hard," she snapped. "You think you're so independent with your little house and your boring job. But the truth is, you wouldn't last a day in my shoes. I need help, and you're going to give it to me, whether you like it or not. And if I have to get mom and dad involved, or anyone else, I will." I felt something inside me crack. This wasn't just about babysitting anymore. This wasn't even about family. This was control. Emily had decided my life wasn't mine to live. And my parents were right there behind her, ready to prop her up no matter what line she crossed. That night, after I put the twins to bed, I sat in the dark living room, my head in my hands. I thought about every time I'd been forced to swallow my pride, every time I'd been made to feel lesser, every time my accomplishments had been brushed aside because Emily needed something. And now, this, leaving her kids on a porch, threatening to call CPS, making me the villain in a story where she was the one destroying trust. I realized then that something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't just taking advantage of me. She had betrayed me in a way I couldn't undo. My own sister had turned me into a pawn in her game of excuses and manipulation. And when I thought it couldn't get worse, the next day proved me wrong. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. "Daniel, we need to talk. Emily told us what you said last night. We are very disappointed. If you can't be responsible, maybe you shouldn't have the kids over at all." I stared at the message, my pulse hammering in my ears. My own parents, without even asking me what happened, had sided with Emily again. Worse, they believed her version of events, where I was the irresponsible one. That was the moment I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep living under their control, under her thumb. Something inside me hardened that night. It wasn't anger anymore, it was resolve. But before I could figure out how to take back control, Emily escalated even further, crossing a line I didn't think she would dare to cross. The real collapse began the following weekend. By then, I had already rehearsed in my head how I would stand firm if Emily tried to drop the kids on me again. I told myself I'd lock the door if I had to, ignore her calls, whatever it took. I was determined to claw back some control. But the thing about people like my sister is they don't play fair. They change the rules before you even realize it. That Friday night, I came home late from work, my mind buzzing with exhaustion. As I pulled into my driveway, I immediately noticed something was wrong. My front porch light was on, and through the window, I could see shadows moving inside my house. My heart lurched. I thought someone had broken in. I ran to the door, fumbling with my keys, only to find the deadbolt already unlocked. I pushed inside and stopped dead. The twins were sprawled on my couch watching cartoons, half-eaten pizza boxes on the coffee table, juice spilled across the rug. And sitting at my dining table, scrolling on her phone like she owned the place, was Emily. "Surprise," she said without looking up. "The kids wanted to stay here tonight, and honestly, I needed a break." "Don't worry, I already put them to bed once, but they got up." I couldn't even find my voice at first. How did you get in?" She smirked, holding up the spare key I'd stupidly given Mom years ago for emergencies. "You really shouldn't hide it in such an obvious place." Mom told me where it was. I felt like the ground had been yanked out from under me. She had let herself into my house, uninvited, and made herself comfortable like this was all part of the plan. I wanted to scream, but the twins were right there. So I stood frozen, gripping the back of a chair, trying to swallow the storm building in my chest. "Emily," I finally managed, "this is not okay. You cannot just come into my house whenever you feel like it. This is my home." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, get over yourself. You're always so dramatic. You live alone, Daniel. What's the big deal? It's not like you're using this space for anything important. You should be grateful you get to spend time with your family." That word again. Grateful. I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy. I sat in my bedroom that night, door locked, while Emily snored on my couch. I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling. My sanctuary, my once safe space, had been invaded. It wasn't just weekends anymore. She had crossed into my daily life, and I was powerless to stop it. The next morning, she was gone, leaving behind a mess of crumbs, sticky plates, and 2 empty juice cartons. On the table sat a handwritten note in her rushed scrawl. "Thanks again. You're a lifesaver. I'll bring them by next week." I crumpled the note in my fist, my hands shaking. That was when the hopelessness hit me full force. For the next few days, I walked around like a ghost. At work, I couldn't focus. At home, I jumped at every noise, half expecting her to barge in again. I started locking the deadbolt, then double-checking it 3 times before bed, but I knew the key was still out there, still in her possession. My parents wouldn't listen if I complained. They'd tell me to stop overreacting. And the thought of confronting her again only filled me with dread, because every time I tried, she found a way to twist it back on me, to make me the bad guy. That week, during Sunday dinner at my parents' house, the final straw snapped. We were all gathered around the table, and Emily was going on about how amazing it was that I'd been so involved with the kids lately. She said it in this syrupy tone, but there was an edge to it, like she was daring me to contradict her. My parents beamed with pride. "See," my mom said, patting my arm. "You're finally stepping up, Daniel. We're proud of you for once." For once. The words lodged in my chest like shards of glass. I had done everything in my life on my own. My education, my house, my career. None of it mattered. What mattered was that I was finally being useful to Emily. I didn't say a word during the rest of dinner. I just sat there, the noise around me fading into a dull roar, thinking about how I had become invisible in my own family. I wasn't a son or a brother anymore. I was a tool, a resource, a backup plan. That night, when I got home, I sank onto my couch in the dark. For the first time in years, I felt truly defeated. Not angry, not frustrated, just hollow. They had stripped me down to nothing. But even in that hollow space, a spark flickered. I realized I couldn't keep fighting them head on. I'd never win that way. Emily thrived on confrontation, and my parents were blind to her faults. If I was going to get out of this, if I was going to take back my life, I would have to be quiet, patient, careful. So I started planning. Not revenge yet, not fully, but small steps. I changed my locks the next morning. I began keeping a journal, documenting every time Emily dumped the kids on me, every message from my parents, every incident. I saved texts, screenshots, voicemails. It felt small, almost insignificant, but it gave me something I hadn't had in months, a sense of control. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Emily wasn't done. She would push further, harder, until she got what she wanted. And when that moment came, I would be ready. The weeks that followed felt like breathing after being held underwater for too long. Changing the locks gave me a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was craving. It was such a simple act, but when I closed the door and turned the new key in the lock, I finally felt like I had reclaimed a small piece of my life. That night, I slept without waking up every hour to check if Emily had barged in again. With that first step, the others came more naturally. I started setting boundaries in subtle ways, not outright confrontations, but quiet lines that I controlled. When Emily texted one Friday afternoon, "Picking you up a pizza, be ready for the kids," I didn't reply. Instead, I let the message sit there, unanswered. For the first time, I turned off my phone and drove to a friend's house across town. We watched a movie, ordered Chinese, and laughed like I hadn't laughed in months. By the time I got home, my phone had 17 missed calls and 3 voicemails, most of them from Emily, alternating between fake sweetness and seething rage. But nothing happened. The world didn't end. The kids were fine, because she'd had no choice but to take care of them herself. That single act of defiance lit something in me. I realized I had more control than I thought. Emily's power only existed because I allowed her to dictate my time, my choices, my life. The moment I withdrew that permission, she was left scrambling. Around that time, I also started focusing more on myself again. Work had always been steady, but I hadn't been ambitious. I'd been too drained, too distracted. Now, with my evenings slowly returning to me, I threw myself into a project I'd been putting off for months. I stayed late a few nights, polishing the presentation, crunching numbers, making sure every detail was airtight. When I finally presented it to my manager, he was impressed. 2 weeks later, I was offered a promotion. It wasn't just about the title or the raise, though those certainly helped. It was the validation. For once, someone looked at me and saw a value that had nothing to do with being Emily's brother. I walked out of that meeting feeling taller, lighter, like I was finally stepping into my own life. My social circle grew again, too. Friends I'd quietly drifted away from during the chaos were happy to see me reaching out. I started saying yes to invitations again, dinners, hikes, even a short weekend trip out of town. That trip, especially, felt like liberation. Standing on a quiet trail with no buzzing phone, no one pounding on my door, I realized how much I had let my family dictate my existence, and how much joy I'd been missing. Even my home began to feel different. Where it had once felt like a prison, invaded and disrespected, I now made it my sanctuary again. I repainted the living room, got rid of the juice-stained rug, even bought myself a new couch. Small changes, but they reminded me that this space was mine. Mine to protect, mine to enjoy, mine to rebuild. Of course, Emily didn't disappear. She still tried to dump the kids on me, still ranted when I refused, still dangled my parents' approval over my head like a weapon. But I didn't react the same way anymore. When she showed up one evening banging on my door, I simply didn't answer. She called me 10 times in a row. I put my phone on silent and went back to cooking dinner. The power she once held slipped a little more with every boundary I enforced. My parents noticed the shift, too. At first, they scolded me, Mom saying I was being cold, Dad warning me not to abandon family. But as weeks passed and Emily's complaints grew more frantic, their calls became less accusatory and more uncertain. "Daniel, maybe you could just talk to her," Mom said one evening, her voice wavering. It was subtle, but for the first time, I felt a crack in the unshakable wall of favoritism that had defined my entire life. I didn't gloat, though. I stayed quiet, calm, collected. I knew better than to celebrate too soon. But inside, I felt stronger than I ever had before. And as my confidence grew, so did my plans. Every voicemail, every angry text, every manipulative message from Emily or my parents, I kept saving them. My journal filled with dates, times, exact words, even small details that seemed irrelevant in the moment. I didn't know yet what I would do with all of it, but I knew it mattered. I knew it was building towards something bigger, because while my life was finally improving, I could feel the tension simmering just beneath the surface. Emily wasn't used to losing control, and people like her don't go down quietly. I could sense it, the storm she was building. The only question was how far she would go to try to break me again. It happened almost by accident. I wasn't looking for leverage. I was just trying to reclaim pieces of my life. But sometimes when you step back, the truth has a way of surfacing in places you never expected. One evening after work, I stopped at a small cafe near my office. It had become my little ritual lately, a way to mark the end of the day before heading home. I was sipping coffee and scrolling through emails when I overheard two women at the table behind me talking about child custody cases. Normally, I would have tuned it out, but one of them mentioned documentation, how texts, call logs, and patterns of neglect were often the strongest evidence in court. Something clicked in my head. My journal, my screenshots, all the proof I'd been gathering. Up until then, I had been documenting everything almost as therapy, a way to reassure myself that I wasn't imagining things. But suddenly I realized I wasn't just venting on paper. I was building a record that could be used if it came to that. That night, I dug deeper. I spent hours researching custody, neglect, abandonment. I read stories of parents who had lost rights because they repeatedly left their kids with others, because they prioritized their personal lives over their children's safety. And with every line I read, my chest tightened. Emily wasn't just irresponsible. What she was doing was dangerous. Leaving her kids on my porch, using me as free childcare, even threatening CPS as a weapon. If anyone was creating a case for themselves, it was her. For the first time, I realized I wasn't powerless. If I wanted to, I could walk into a lawyer's office tomorrow and hand over a mountain of evidence showing exactly who Emily was and what she had been doing. The thought scared me at first. These were my niece and nephew. We're talking about their mother. I didn't want to hurt them, didn't want to drag them through something ugly. But as I sat there, staring at the stack of notes and screenshots spread across my desk, another feeling began to push its way through the fear, resolve. Because as much as I loved those kids, I knew Emily wasn't protecting them. She was using them. And if she kept spiraling, it was only a matter of time before they ended up in real danger. Meanwhile, things at work were blossoming. The promotion came with new responsibilities, and I rose to the challenge. I started traveling for meetings, networking with people I never would have met before. One night, over dinner with a colleague who used to work in family law, I casually mentioned a friend dealing with a difficult sibling. He didn't pry, but the advice he gave me stuck. The person with the most consistent record usually wins. Emotions can be spun in court. Facts can't. I filed that away. At the same time, Emily's behavior was unraveling. The less I engaged, the more desperate she became. Her texts shifted from demands to guilt trips to outright threats. One read, "If you don't start pulling your weight, don't be surprised if mom and dad cut you out completely." Another, "I swear, Daniel, I'll make sure everyone knows how heartless you are. You'll regret this." I saved them all. The funny thing was, my parents were starting to notice her instability too, even if they wouldn't admit it outright. When Emily stormed out of Sunday dinner after I calmly refused to take the twins for the week, Mom sighed and said under her breath, "She's been stressed lately." It was the first time I'd ever heard even the faintest crack in their unwavering support of her. And I realized something else. Emily had grown so used to being the golden child that she never thought she'd have to answer for her actions. She believed her word was enough, that mom and dad would back her forever, that I would fold no matter what. But I had been patient, careful, deliberate. I was no longer the brother she could push around. I had a good job now, a solid home, a growing support network of friends. I wasn't the scared little sibling standing alone against her favoritism. I was stable. I was respected. And I had proof, months worth of it, ready to be used if she tried to drag me down again. That's when I made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to confront Emily outright anymore. I wasn't going to beg my parents to understand. Instead, I would let her dig her own hole. I would stay calm, keep records, and position myself exactly where I needed to be. Because eventually, she was going to go too far. I could feel it building. And when she did, when she crossed that last line, I would be ready, not just to defend myself, but to make sure she could never use me, or her kids, as pawns again. The setup was complete. All I had to do was wait for her to make the fatal mistake. It came on a Saturday night, the kind where you can sense trouble before it even arrives. I was in the middle of cooking dinner, something simple, pasta with garlic and olive oil, when the pounding started on my door. Not a knock, not even a ring of the bell. Pounding. Heavy, insistent, entitled. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know it was Emily. I let her pound for a full minute before I opened the door. She stood there, makeup smudged, hair wild, the twins clinging to her legs like shadows. "You're taking them," she barked, shoving their backpacks forward. "No," I said simply, my voice even. Her eyes widened like no one had ever dared tell her that word before. "Excuse me." I didn't raise my voice, didn't flinch. I said no. "You need to make other arrangements." That was all it took for her to unravel. She launched into a tirade right there on my porch, voice raised so loud the neighbors peeked through their curtains. "You're pathetic, Daniel. Selfish. You've always been a failure, and now you can't even step up for your own family. Mom and Dad were right about you. You'll never be worth anything." The twins shrank back, their eyes wide, while Emily ranted. I didn't argue. I let her scream. And when she threatened again, "Fine, I'll call the cops and tell them you abandoned them. See how you like explaining that?" I only nodded slowly. "Go ahead," I said. "But before you do, you might want to know that I've been documenting everything. Every text, every voicemail, every time you left the kids with me without asking. Even the night you left them alone on my porch. I have dates, times, screenshots. I've spoken with a lawyer. So if the police come, I'll be ready to show them exactly what's been happening." For the first time, her words caught in her throat. She blinked, confusion flickering across her face. You wouldn't." "I would," I said, calm as stone. "Because I'm done being used. I'm done being your scapegoat. And if you try to drag me down, I'll make sure the truth comes out." "Do you really want CPS looking at your record, Emily?" The silence that followed was electric. Her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to spit venom, but the venom wasn't there anymore. Not when she realized I wasn't bluffing. I crouched down to the twins' level, keeping my voice soft. "You two should go with your mom tonight, okay? This isn't your fault." They nodded nervously, clutching their backpacks. Emily sputtered, but she was cornered. She grabbed the twins' hands, yanked them toward the car, and hissed, "This isn't over." But deep down, we both knew it was. The next day, I took the final step. I forwarded a small portion of my documentation, just enough, to my parents. A few screenshots of Emily's threats, a photo of the twins left alone on my porch, a voicemail where she screamed about dumping them on me, whether I liked it or not. For once, they didn't call to scold me. Instead, Mom's voice on the phone was quiet, almost trembling. "Daniel, we didn't know it was that bad." I didn't rub it in. I didn't need to. I just said, "Now you do." From that moment on, the calls from Emily slowed. The surprise drop-off stopped. The tone shifted. She wasn't bold anymore. She was cautious, careful, as if afraid I might unleash everything I had. And in a way, that was the sweetest revenge of all. Not yelling, not fighting, not stooping to her level. Just standing my ground with the truth in hand, and letting her realize she could no longer control me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the family doormat. I was the one holding the line. But the fallout, the way my parents reacted once the full truth came crashing down, and the way Emily scrambled when she realized the golden child pedestal was finally cracking, that was a storm of its own. The fallout didn't come all at once. It trickled in slowly, like cracks spreading across glass until the whole pane shatters. The first real sign came the following weekend, when my parents invited me over for dinner. I almost didn't go. I expected another ambush, another round of guilt tripping. But curiosity got the better of me, so I went. When I arrived, the mood was different. The table was quieter than usual, the air heavy. Emily wasn't there. Over roast chicken and potatoes, my dad finally cleared his throat. "Your sister's upset," he said carefully. "She says you've been difficult. But after seeing those messages, well..." He glanced at Mom, who nodded faintly. "We think maybe we've been too hard on you." It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was the closest thing I'd ever heard from them. I didn't argue, didn't gloat. I just said, "I needed you to see the truth." The truth worked its way through, piece by piece. Emily stopped dropping the kids off entirely. At first, I thought she was just regrouping, But then I heard from a mutual friend that she'd been forced to explain herself to a social worker after one of the neighbors reported her screaming fit on my porch. Apparently, someone had recorded it on their phone, kids crying in the background, and sent it in. Combined with the evidence I'd gathered, it was enough to put her on notice. She called me once after that, her voice small, stripped of its usual fire. "You didn't have to go that far," she whispered. I answered calmly, "You left me no choice." Then I hung up. The golden child pedestal she'd stood on for 30 years had finally crumbled. My parents no longer treated her word as gospel. They started checking on me directly instead of running through her. At family gatherings, I noticed the subtle shift. When she spoke, fewer people nodded automatically. When I spoke, people listened. The balance had changed. As for me, I kept living my life. Work was thriving, my home was mine again, and for the first time in years, I felt light. I still saw the twins occasionally, but on my terms. Short visits, fun outings, no strings attached. And you know what? They were happier too. When they came over, they laughed, played, and didn't look at me like I was some reluctant babysitter. They just saw me as Uncle Daniel. Months later, at a family barbecue, I stood in the yard watching Emily sulk at a picnic table, glaring at me while Mom refilled my plate. The old me would have felt guilty, would have tried to smooth things over. But not anymore. Because I had finally learned the truth. Family isn't about being used, manipulated, or sacrificed on someone else's altar. Family is about respect. And when they don't give it, you have every right to take your life back. As the sun dipped low and laughter carried across the yard, I caught Emily's eye one last time. She opened her mouth like she wanted to start another fight, but then she saw the look on my face, the calm, unshakable resolve, and she went quiet. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one silenced. I turned away, smiling, and thought to myself, I didn't just win. I finally got free.